darkness, silence, then a whisper of sand shifting across ancient stone. For more than 3,000 years, a secret slept beneath the Valley of the Kings. A secret so well hidden that even seasoned explorers walked past it without knowing the truth lay inches beneath their feet. But when it finally emerged, it shook the world of archaeology like an earthquake. Imagine a sealed tomb untouched since the age of the pharaohs. Gold piled so high it blinded the first eyes that saw it. A boy king whose death raised more questions than answers, and a mystery that still haunts scholars today. But that's not the strangest part. The real story is far darker than most people realize. Because behind the shimmering mask and treasure-filled chambers lies a tale of political intrigue, ancient betrayal, and a life cut brutally short. Tutankhamun was supposed to be a forgotten footnote in history. Someone wanted it that way. Someone worked very hard to erase him. Yet destiny had other plans, and fate would make this forgotten boy the most famous pharaoh of all time. But how did a child, barely old enough to rule, become the center of one of history's greatest mysteries? Why was his tomb so small, so rushed, so strangely constructed? And why, after millennia of silence, did his discovery spark rumors of curses, conspiracies, and cover-ups? These questions form the heart of Tutankhamun's true story. A story more gripping than any legend. A story that begins with a single moment in 1922, when a young archaeologist brushed sand from a hidden step and felt his heartbeat stop. And yet, the real twist was still waiting in the shadows ahead. To understand Tutankhamun's truth, we must step into a world trembling on the edge of collapse. Picture Egypt around 1330 BCE, its deserts shimmering under the brutal sun, its temples rising like mountains of carved stone, its people struggling to understand why their gods seemed suddenly silent. The empire was powerful, yet unstable, and no one felt this tension more than the rulers inside the royal palace at Akhenaten. Just a few years before Tutankhamun's birth, Egypt had been turned upside down by his father, Pharaoh Akhenaten. He wasn't like the pharaohs who came before him. He abandoned centuries of tradition. He closed temples that had stood since the dawn of Egyptian civilization. He forced the entire kingdom to worship a single god, Aten, the sun disk, believing it was the only true divine power. No one expected this, and many did not forgive it. This religious revolution tore Egypt apart. Priests lost power. Cities lost their identity. Families whispered their anger behind closed doors. Some historians even believe food shortages and disease spread as the old systems of worship and administration fell apart. The land of the Nile, usually so steady and eternal, felt like it was cracking from within. Amid this chaos, a royal child was born. His name was Tutankhaten, living image of Aten. He entered a palace divided by politics, religion, and ambition. And before he could even walk, powerful figures were already shaping his destiny. Who raised him? Who whispered in his ear? Who planned his future? Few records survive, and that silence speaks volumes. In those early years, the royal city of Akhenaten glowed with white limestone buildings and wide-open courts. But beneath its brightness hid fear. Loyalists of the old gods plotted a return to tradition. Supporters of Akhenaten fought to protect his revolution. Somewhere between these two sides, the young prince grew up small, fragile, and very much alone. When Akhenaten died, Egypt faced a terrifying question. Who would rule next? There was no strong successor. No adult heir, just a boy barely 9 years old, and behind him waited powerful advisors hungry to control the throne. That's when the child king stepped into history, unaware of the storm gathering around him. He never chose this path. He never asked for a crown heavy with conflict, but his name Tutankhaten would soon change. His life would become the turning point of a nation desperate to heal. And the choices made in these early years would lead to secrets so deep that even his burial would reflect them. Because as Tut stepped onto the throne, everything was about to collapse. Again, and the people guiding him were not acting out of kindness. They had their own plans, their own loyalties, and their own fears that would shape the mysterious story we uncover next. Tutankhamun's coronation should have been a moment of triumph. But behind the ceremonial gold, the incense, and the chanting priests, tension coiled like a serpent. The boy king sat on a throne far too large for him, his feet unable to touch the floor. And in the shadows behind him stood the men who truly held power. The cunning advisor and Horemheb, the ambitious military commander. No one expected this uneasy alliance to last. Almost immediately, they pushed the child king to make a dramatic choice. Egypt was breaking under Akhenaten's religious revolution, so the new pharaoh, barely 9 years old, signed a decree that reversed his father's legacy. Temples of the old gods reopened, priests regained their power, and his name changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. It was a symbolic victory for the old order, but it came with a cost. The palace at Akhenaten was abandoned. Entire families packed their belongings and fled the ghostly city. Statues were toppled, walls were smashed. Dust swallowed a place once meant to be eternal. Tutankhamun and his court returned to Thebes, the ancient heart of Egypt, where the old gods waited to reclaim their throne. But the journey was not peaceful. Angry factions still clashed, and disease haunted the caravans. In those early years of his reign, Tutankhamun tried to restore balance. He repaired temples devastated by neglect. He honored gods who had been banned. He supported festivals meant to unite the nation. And slowly, the people began to love him, not as a powerful ruler, but as a symbol of hope. But beneath this fragile peace, danger grew in the dark corridors of the royal court. The king's advisor, acted like a father but eyed the throne. Horemheb, the general, sought to rebuild Egypt's military and expand his influence. Both men knew the truth. The boy king was sickly, fragile, and unlikely to live long. They whispered to priests. They manipulated laws. They waited for the right moment. And Tutankhamun, young as he was, sensed that something was deeply wrong. Still, he tried to rule with dignity. He married Akhenaten, his half-sister, and one of the few people he trusted. Together, they attempted to secure the royal bloodline. They dreamed of giving Egypt a future free from political chaos. Yet tragedy struck again and again. Their 2 daughters were stillborn, their tiny mummified bodies placed in miniature coffins. The royal line seemed cursed, and the court grew restless. Meanwhile, threats outside the palace intensified. Egypt's enemies sensed weakness. The Hittites, a powerful empire to the north, tested Egypt's borders. Rebellions sparked in distant provinces, and whispers filled the desert winds. If the boy king failed to restore Egypt's strength, the empire could collapse entirely. So Tutankhamun made a bold choice. He personally oversaw plans to rebuild Egypt's armies. He prepared for a military campaign to reclaim lost territories. Some historians believe he even intended to lead his troops into battle, a daring move for a frail pharaoh. But that's when everything began to fall apart. Rumors spread through the palace. Strange accidents occurred. Trusted servants vanished. And Tutankhamun's health began to worsen at an alarming pace. Was it illness? Was it injury? Or was something far more sinister happening behind closed doors? The truth is chilling. And as the boy king pushed forward, determined to restore Egypt's glory, a silent enemy watched him grow weaker, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Something terrible was coming. And no one least of all Tutankhamun saw it in time. Something changed in the final year of Tutankhamun's life. Court scribes stopped recording certain events. Royal officials traveled with unusual secrecy. And the boy king, who once appeared determined and hopeful, began moving with a limp so severe that eyewitnesses said he could barely stand without support. But that's not the most unsettling part. The closer he came to a major political breakthrough, the more his world seemed to unravel. Tutankhamun was preparing for a campaign to the north, an effort to reclaim Egyptian territory and restore the prestige lost under his father's rule. Every soldier, every advisor, every priest knew what this meant. If Tut returned victorious, he would no longer be a puppet. He would be a true pharaoh, powerful enough to challenge anyone who had manipulated him. But power attracts danger. And in the shadows, someone decided he could not be allowed to succeed. One night, while the palace slept, servants reported a commotion near the royal quarters. The details are vague whispers of a fall, a crash, or a sudden cry. Some claimed Tutankhamun injured his leg in an accident. Others insisted he was attacked. A few believed poison was involved. No record explains what truly happened, but from that moment on, his health spiraled downward with terrifying speed. Modern scans of his mummy reveal a shocking picture. A fractured leg, severe infections, traces of malaria, skeletal deformities that suggest years of pain. But those medical clues raise even darker questions. Was the leg injury a result of a simple accident, or the aftermath of violence? Why was his burial rushed, his tomb small, his treasures seemingly grabbed from other royal burials? And why were certain artifacts unfinished, as if no one expected him to die so suddenly? His wife, Akhenaten, must have sensed the danger closing in. After Tutankhamun's death, she made a desperate, unprecedented move. She wrote to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's enemy, begging him to send one of his sons to marry her. She promised to make the foreign prince Egypt's next pharaoh. This was unthinkable. No Egyptian queen had ever done such a thing. What terrified her so much that she would risk inviting a foreign ruler into the royal line? The Hittite prince did come, but he never reached Egypt. He was murdered at the border. No one claimed responsibility, but everyone knew who benefited from his death. The palace factions were moving with precision. I stepped forward and claimed the throne. Horemheb secured control of the army, and Akhenaten vanished from history. But the biggest mystery still lay untouched in the desert. A tomb door sealed with ancient plaster, magical symbols guarding the entrance, and inside, a burial that seemed hurried, almost improvised, like a family trying to conceal a secret before the world discovered it. Tutankhamun's death was officially recorded as natural, but his tomb tells a different story, one filled with contradictions, rushed decisions, and clues buried in gold. So what really happened to the boy king? Was he the tragic victim of disease? Or was he silenced by those who feared what he might become? The deeper we dig, the stranger the truth becomes. And in the next part, we uncover the consequences, the revelations, and the theories that push Tutankhamun's mystery into darker territory than anyone imagined. When Tutankhamun died, Egypt didn't just lose a king. It lost the final thread holding a fragile nation together. The boy who tried to heal his father's wounds had vanished, and with him disappeared the hope of a stable future. But that's only the beginning. His death triggered a chain of events that reshaped Egypt's destiny and raised chilling questions that still haunt historians today. The first consequence was immediate, a power vacuum. I seized the throne within days, performing Tutankhamun's burial rites to legitimize himself. Horemheb strengthened his grip over the military, preparing for the moment he would claim the crown. And the priests, once weakened by Akhenaten's revolution, re-emerged with renewed force, ensuring the old gods ruled Egypt once again. But even as they restored tradition, they erased Tutankhamun from the record, chiseled his name from monuments, removed him from king lists, and buried his memory under layers of silence. Why erase a child king who attempted to fix the nation? Because acknowledging him meant acknowledging Akhenaten. And acknowledging Akhenaten meant admitting the empire had spiraled dangerously close to collapse. So Tutankhamun became a casualty of politics even after death, a piece of history deliberately hidden to protect the reputations of those who followed. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. Meanwhile, experts studying his mummy uncovered a haunting collection of clues. The fractured leg, the signs of infection, the traces of malaria, and the unusual shape of his skull and spine. These findings paint a picture of a fragile young man living with chronic pain, yet they also raise questions. If he was so weak, why was his tomb so small? Why were many of his treasures originally crafted for someone else? And why was his burial rushed, as if his death had caught the entire court completely off guard? Each answer leads to another mystery. Some scholars argue he simply fell, broke his leg, and succumbed to infection. Others point to political motives, A's ambition, Horemheb's impatience, and the queen's desperate plea to the Hittites. There are even theories of deliberate sabotage during his planned military campaign. None can be proven. All remain possible, but the most revealing detail lies not in his bones, but in his legacy. Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered untouched in 1922, became the single greatest archaeological find in history. The treasures buried with him, golden shrines, jeweled daggers, chariots, thrones, and the iconic golden mask should have belonged to a mighty ruler. Instead, they were placed with a boy who was never meant to stand in the spotlight. The world finally saw him, not as a forgotten king, but as a symbol of ancient Egypt's beauty, brilliance, and tragedy. And perhaps that's the greatest irony. Those who erased his name wanted him forgotten. Yet his discovery turned him into the most famous pharaoh of all time. Still, one question lingers over every artifact, every clue, every theory. Did Tutankhamun die as a victim of illness? Or was he removed because he threatened the ambitions of powerful men? The truth remains buried in the sands of Egypt, just out of reach, just mysterious enough to keep historians searching. And with every discovery, his story only grows more haunting. In the final part, we step back from the politics and the intrigue, and look at the emotional echo of a young ruler whose voice still whispers across the centuries. A whisper that refuses to fade. In the end, Tutankhamun's story is not simply about gold, power, or mystery. It is the quiet echo of a young life caught in forces far bigger than himself. A boy who wanted to heal a broken kingdom. A king who tried to restore balance in a world twisted by ambition. And a human being whose final moments remain trapped in a fog of unanswered questions. When we look at his golden mask, we see perfection, calm eyes, serene lips, eternal beauty. But behind that mask lies the face of a teenager who endured pain, pressure, and fear. He did not choose to be a symbol. He did not ask to become a legend. Yet history decided otherwise, lifting him from obscurity and placing him at the center of the greatest archaeological discovery ever made. There is something profoundly human about his story. Something that reminds us how fragile power can be and how even the smallest voice can echo across millennia. Tutankhamun ruled for barely a decade. He left behind no heirs, no grand monuments of his own design. Yet today, billions know his name. Entire museums revolve around his legacy. And his life continues to inspire new theories, new debates, and new wonders. So, what should we take from his journey? Perhaps a reminder that history is not always written by the victorious. Sometimes it is written by the forgotten, by the lives that were meant to fade. Tutankhamun was almost erased, but fate refused to let that happen. His story rose again from the dust, brighter than any treasure sealed in his tomb. And maybe that is the lesson he leaves us with. That truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing. That the human spirit, broken, fragile, or lost, still finds a voice in the end. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe to History Hub for more cinematic stories. Because the past is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And the next one might be even more astonishing than this.